This is your Friday Daily Delivery. I'm Michael Rand. Glad to be back. Last show of the week. Hope you guys are all sticking around, listening. Maybe you're already on vacation. Some people taking long weekends with the 4th coming up on Tuesday. No show planned next Tuesday, by the way, but otherwise should have 4 shows next week, a full complement of non-holiday shows on Daily Delivery next week. Good one today. Going to talk some Wolves with Timberwolves beat writer Chris Hine. Free agency in the NBA starting today. Wolves with some decisions to make, especially after cutting ties with Taurean Prince earlier this week and not offering Nickeil Alexander-Walker a qualifying offer this week as well. Maybe some work to do there on the wings. Sounds like Alexander-Walker could be back if they are able to get him on a long-term deal, but I'll talk about that a little bit more later, and Chris Hine and I will get into the draft, Karl-Anthony Towns, other big-picture roster-building stuff with this team going forward. Got to get to the Lynx at the end of the show. Suddenly a team that started poorly and looked like it was just bound for the lottery and playing for 2024. Hey, if the playoffs started today, season wouldn't have started today. That'd be weird. We would be talking about nothing happened already. If the playoffs started today, they would be in. They'd be the 7-8 seed, somewhere in there in the WNBA. Another good win for them on Thursday night. Another big game for Napheesa Collier. So we'll end the show with that. First, though, what did I miss? It's kind of refreshing to hear the Wild talk about this year's recently concluded NHL draft and their strategy going into it. Everybody on the planet who at least follows a modicum of hockey knows that a seemingly forever weakness for this team has been depth at center. They've had some good ones, for sure. Joel Eriksson-Ek is a very good one, very good two-way center on the team right now, but they have been looking for high-quality centers for longer than I can really remember. So they go into this recent draft, and they're still looking at that from a prospect pool, from an organizational standpoint, that, yeah, even in the minors, they need to add centers, even if they've got some guys down there knocking on the door like Marco Rossi. They need to get better, bigger, stronger, faster, more skilled up the middle. So what do? Not one, not two, but 3 centers. First-round pick Charlie Stramel. 21st pick overall. We talked about him a little bit yesterday, but then they went into rounds 2 through 7 on Thursday, took Rasmus Kupalainen Thursday at number 53 overall, and then Riley Heidt 64th overall, all 3 of them centers, and they said, hey, they intentionally went into this targeting centers. They knew they needed to add centers, and Sarah reporting that they even passed somebody on their board that they thought maybe they had a little bit higher on the board to make a pick to get a center. So teams always try to talk about, we're going to take the best player available. Well, in this case, the Wild came close to that, but they also specifically drafted for organizational need, and they drafted for someone who maybe wasn't the exact top player on their board. I don't think they reached all that far, but they did pass over at least one player. Judd Brackett saying just having someone higher on our list doesn't necessarily mean they're the right fit for us. So that's just interesting to me, just understanding what they're doing. This is kind of how Bill Guerin is building this team, finding the needs, finding the holes, finding how to plug them, thinking about the present and the future. I mean, these are all things that a good general manager should be doing, and I think Bill Guerin is a very good general manager. It just struck me a little bit that, wow, not only did they target centers, they were willing to kind of jump around their board just a little bit to make sure they got that. Now, both of those first 2 guys they picked are 6'3" size, some two-way ability. So these are guys that could be helping them in 2 to 3 years down the road. And again, that doesn't help you tomorrow. That doesn't give you that talented playmaking center to play with Kirill Kaprizov necessarily, where they've been trying to figure that out for the first couple of years he's been here. I mean, Ryan Hartman's done a serviceable job in a lot of those years, especially 2 years ago. But if they're really being honest about it, they would love, I'm sure, to pair Kaprizov with someone more established and dynamic, or an up-and-comer like Rossi who can become that kind of player. But right now, they still probably lack that at the NHL level, but they're trying to address that in the minors, and they aren't afraid, it sounds like, to jump around their board a little bit to try to get it done.
MGM Wine and Spirits is the choice for savings, service, and a great selection of spirits, premixed cocktails, wines, and of course, ice-cold beers and hard seltzers. With over 30 locations throughout the Twin Cities and beyond, there's an MGM near you. Head to mgmwineandspirits.com to find a convenient location in your area. Get social. Follow MGM on Facebook and Instagram for all the latest news and trends. Make great moments with MGM Wine and Spirits, your locally owned and operated choice for over 50 years. Save time, save money. Shop MGM.
Let's talk Timberwolves on today's show with Chris Hine. NBA free agency starts Friday. Technically, it's kind of the negotiating window, and then players can sign a few days after that. The Wolves already kind of did what might be their biggest, at least free agency move of the season, Chris, with the Naz Reid signing the 3-year, $42 million deal, the player option on that third year that we learned about just a few days ago. But I wanted to get your perspectives on that and what else might be coming up. So let's talk about that. But first, how are you? How's your summer going?
Things are good. We're back in Minnesota. Spent some time with the family in Pennsylvania for a few weeks. But the last week or two, I've been back in Minnesota and trying to enjoy the summer. That's good. Hey, congrats too. I saw you on the Outsports list of the 100 most influential people in sports. Good for you. Yeah, that was a very cool honor from Outsports. I do not feel any more influential than I did 2 days ago. I guess that means I'm an influencer now. Should I start peddling questionable products on Instagram? Is that you could? Is that what I think that's what usually some beauty tips and beauty secrets and health secrets. I think that's the lane I should go now because I have influence apparently. Well, you've always been one of the 100 most influential guests on this show, so you already had that going for you. But genuinely, congrats on that and all the work that you've done to earn that distinction. And a lot of it lately covering the Timberwolves. What did you make of the Naz Reid signing? Because it caught me a little bit by surprise. I thought they'd have to pay him a little bit more if they were going to keep him, or in terms of how. Keep him at least from testing free agency. What did you make of them coming to an agreement before free agency started? I had kind of handicapped it at about 50-50 in my mind that he was going to be back or not. There were always good vibes between Naz and the organization. Tim Connolly really wanted him back. Naz did not want to leave, I don't think. Obviously not. Just between the combination of this team helping develop him, his really good friends, and Ant and Jaden being on the team, and presumably going to be here for the next half decade or so. I think the love of the fan base. He feels that the kind of social media craze that is on Timberwolves Twitter around any and all things Naz Reid. I think he feels the love, and you could go get more. Maybe he could have gotten more money elsewhere. Who knows? Maybe he could have started elsewhere. We'll never know the answers to these questions now. But there were just a number of things outside of the money or a starting role, kind of those intangible things that maybe another organization couldn't really offer him that the Timberwolves could. And as long as the money was respectable and was close to, fair value for what he might get elsewhere, that was always going to be the I think maybe the preferred destination. So the Wolves got to about $14 million a year, which is higher than the mid-level that many teams that maybe coveted Naz Reid were going to be able to offer him. Maybe it was less than some of these other teams that weren't up against the salary cap. Maybe they would have been able to offer him some more. We don't know. But you always run the risk of also getting pinched if you go to the open market as well. So if the Wolves are sitting here, it's a good situation. Your friends are here. The coaching staff. You mesh well with the coach's offensive system. And they're at $14 million a year for you, which is more than most teams are going to be able to pay you. Why not go ahead and sign? Do you think from a practical perspective, this kind of gives him a bigger role? Because obviously, as long as Gobert and Towns are here, he's not going to be a starter. But you see a fair amount of minutes and opportunity, even if they're
even if those guys are, taking up a lot of minutes and if they're healthy, because inevitably one of them is going to miss some time with, even if it's minor stuff. There's going to be games where one of them's in foul trouble, things like that. Like, it seems like there are enough minutes. Does this contract signify bigger, more consistent role for him?
Well, I think it has to. I think you don't pay him $14 million a year. He will be, he's making more money than Kyle Anderson will be next year. He'll be making more money than anybody that'll be coming off the bench. So if he's not your sixth man or right behind Kyle Anderson as the seventh man next year, then this will be a waste of a contract for the Timberwolves, just from a financial perspective. So if they're not using him, then they basically have to say, okay, what are we going to do with this asset then? He'll still have a lot of suitors on the trade market. Like if this isn't working out by the middle of the season and Naz isn't getting the minutes he wants, and or the team just can't find a way to use him, they can always trade him and get a nice return. But they signed him with the intention that he's going to play a lot of minutes. As our colleague Dane Moore kind of breaks down in his podcast, he's like, there's 96 minutes of power forward and center a night to divvy up kind of between Naz, Karl, Rudy, and how does Kyle Anderson also kind of fit in that picture? Now, this is, as you said, this is when everybody's healthy, right? And the odds of everybody being healthy at the same time are maybe a little lower than you think. Guys taking games off here and there for, Rudy, things up an ankle or something, stuff is just going to happen naturally, that I think some of this stuff about minutes is just going to work out by itself, in terms of how the pie is kind of dished out. But I think when all are healthy, I think there is an avenue there for Naz to play in the neighborhood of low to mid 20s. For Kyle Anderson's minutes to maybe come down from where they were a year ago when he was starting a lot of games. I don't think you necessarily need Kyle Anderson to be in the 30s minute wise. I think he could also be in the low to mid 20s. He can play any position. So his minutes can come at the 3. They could come at backup point guard for some stretches of time. He could be there. So I'm not as concerned about where the minutes are going to come from, just because I think they showed that in a couple games that they had with Karl and Rudy last year, Naz was still getting significant minutes and playing really good basketball. So I think you just kind of bottle that, and that's the blueprint moving forward. And then injuries and everything else will kind of take care of itself, as to how the minutes are going to shake out.
Do you think he has another level to his ceiling? Because we were starting to see him really come on before he got hurt towards the end of last year, probably playing a lot of his best basketball. And he's a guy that's definitely improved, improved his body, improved his overall skill set as he's progressed through these 4 years already in Minnesota. But is there another level to him yet?
Well, he could always improve defensively.
Good point.
That's always something that Naz will be able to improve. Rebounding, I know, is something that is going to be a big focus of his and of the teams moving forward, especially on the offensive end, to have him improve in that area. So those are probably the two main areas. But offensively, I feel like, he's potentially a matchup nightmare coming off the bench for some teams as other teams get into their bench and maybe go to their kind of backups. Like, he's going to be able to, I think, really torch some people. I've always liked Naz as a guy, as somebody to interview. I was never really sold on his game for the first couple of years, but the last 2 years, he really made me just a believer in his game and his future and his potential, because each year he's just gotten better and better. So I tend to think that, he's going to be able to add to his game. He's going to be able to improve in some areas, because I think that's just what he's done through his first 4 years. He's steadily improved. He's put in the work, and he's really matured, I think, in some ways. So I think there's still a lot of untapped potential with Naz, and he's left it open that after 2 years he could opt out of this deal and he could be back in free agency 2 years from now.
Now, there is a school of thought that might say they got Naz Reid now. If they keep him and they suddenly and they keep Towns and they keep Gobert, they're going to be paying those guys, 110 million starting in 2024. That's a lot of money to have tied up in three big men, even if, Towns and Reid are fairly versatile and can play the four. Does this, I asked Royce the same thing on Monday, and I think we got to the same place, but I want to know what you think. Does this in any way change how you forecast Towns' future, whether it's the immediate future and the possibility of a trade or kind of the longer term, within the next 365 to 375 days of a trade?
I don't think it changes the calculus of any of that.
Okay.
Quite honestly. I think they still have the ability to run it back if they want to with this signing. And the salary cap questions and luxury tax questions that are going to be present next season are still going to be there, whether they sign Naz Reid to this extension or not. Because that money was going to go likely somewhere, right? So I don't think it really changes the calculus too much. I think if you're kicking the can down the road for some of these major decisions a year from now, you're still going to have a year's worth of information to evaluate where this team is at. And so the picture of what the roster looks like and what you want the future to look like is going to change significantly over the next year. So I think saying that signing Naz Reid and having a third center now, inked for however much money they are devoting to the center position, I don't think it necessarily means that trading Karl is the move a year from now. I think we're just going to have to see what this team looks like a year from now before you get a feel for maybe where this thing is headed.
Karl's
so I hesitate to say it means a Towns trade is more or less likely either now or in the future.
I think that's fair. I mean, I think all it means to a certain degree, aside from the salary cap ramifications, is that they have someone who can be a starting, perhaps caliber four, can play next to Gobert if they decide to go that route. But you're right. I don't think they made this move saying, okay, now we can trade Towns. It just maybe gives them a little bit more flexibility to do kind of whatever they do want to do. And I will say of Towns, he's been very busy this offseason. He's been on some podcasts with Pat Bev, with Paul George. He's been, I think, Paris Fashion Tour. Maybe he did that last year too. You see him in all these trade rumors. I saw the most recent one, ESPN.com, saying Towns to the Knicks for Julius Randle, a couple other players, and three.
Was that a reported rumor, or was that just thrown out there?
No. That was a here.
We need to distinguish between those two
good
things.
Point. Yes, this was not a these two sides are talking. This is a hey.
Yes.
Here's something that might make sense. But they included 3 first-round picks, and I thought that was interesting. Just kind of engaging value, and some of these things are more reported or more kind of sourced than others. But he was the subject of a GQ article. He's threw out the first pitch at a Yankees game. That was part of the GQ article, and I'd seen that on social media already. Is this busier than he usually is in the off season? Because it seems like it is to me.
I mean, the podcast appearances maybe, but I also think on some level he's just trying to do his friends a solid by helping promote their shows. As we've seen, maybe those looser environments of those podcast appearances maybe aren't the best avenue for him to express his thoughts.
When he's retired, he's going to go down as he's going to change the game.
Listen. If he ever starts his own podcast, watch out. Watch out.
I got to get him on this podcast, by the way. I got to get him on this podcast.
I know. We'll see what happens then. Get a former teammate on the show and see what happens.
Right.
I don't know. I mean, he's always been one to do a lot of off-season traveling. If you ever follow his Instagram, he's hopping around the globe pretty much every off-season. So, I maybe just a few more media appearances than he normally does, but we'll see what happens. I thought the GQ profile was fine.
Yeah,
I didn't think there was anything that was bulletin board material for the rest of the league in that. or social media.
No.
So, we'll see. I think, I'll be interested to hear some of his thoughts about some of the blowback he got from those appearances as kind of time settles here, and maybe as we get closer to the season when he might be, talking about some of that stuff a little more.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to look at it. And we'll see really what does happen here in the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Nothing officially with him can happen for a while anyway. And I think your instinct has probably been the right one all along, is that they're probably going to run it back this year. And with Naz Reid back, they do have the components of a good roster. That said, you mentioned Kyle Anderson can play all over the court, even some backup point guard. He might have to, because they don't have a whole lot of space left to do much else once free agency starts. I don't know what their plan is beyond the Reid signing, but it doesn't. The one offshoot of that is if if they had lost him, which I don't think they wanted to, but it would have given them a little bit more flexibility to maybe keep some more of these other reserve role players. That's going to get tougher now.
It is going to get tougher. So I think that's kind of where they're at right now, is how do you make the puzzle pieces fit with the luxury tax line, with Nickeil Alexander-Walker. There's a willingness there to want to re-sign him after the way he came in and fit in late in the season, and really contributed down the stretch and in the playoffs for them. But it's all about making the money work. So is it waiving Taurean Prince and just wishing him the best and using that money to re-sign Nickeil, and then make another small addition to the roster, like maybe find a cheap backup point guard?
Right.
Maybe that's the route. Is it letting go of both Taurean Prince and Nickeil Alexander-Walker and using more money to sign maybe a bigger free agent? Yahoo Sports was reporting that, Dante DiVincenzo and Bruce Brown could be two targets of the Wolves. I think Bruce Brown, would make a lot of sense for the Timberwolves, just on paper. But that would require some sacrificing. Or does ownership let them go into the tax to make some of these moves to round out the roster? That's another option. But the problem with that is now you're already looking at the luxury tax coming up here in future seasons once Ant and Jaden get their extension. So do you want to be a repeater, and the penalties that may incur with that, or do you, because you can stay below the tax line this year, you are able to do it, do you want to make sure you're under it this year because it's coming in future years? So a number of questions that they're going to have to answer along those lines in the next week here, and we'll see how it shakes out. I mean, this is not anything reported. My gut instinct tells me they want to stay below the tax.
Yeah, I think so too.
For this season, they don't want to go into the tax, because those bills are coming the next season or two. Yeah,
no, that's a good point. Some final thoughts here.
But the other thing I want to mention too is, like, these are middle of the bench, almost end of bench moves at this point. Like, their starting five is, assuming there is no Karl trade. If Karl gets traded, everything is upended.
Yes, of course.
But this is all assuming there's no Karl trade. Their starting lineup is set. They have their first two guys off the bench next year, and it's kind of figuring out who's eighth, who's ninth, 10th. Like, that's where they're at right now with the roster for next season, which is not a bad place to necessarily be.
Well, and that's gonna bring me to my final thought, which was, they also have guys. Wendell Moore was a first round pick a year ago. I think they saw some things they liked out of Josh Minot, their second round pick. They just they got guys like Luka Garza, who was on a 2-way last year, that showed him some things. And they just took 2 second rounders who I imagine one of them certainly is not ready to play because he's got the Achilles problem, and the other one is very much they're both of those are developmental guys, but you can see them already thinking about kind of future years and needing those kind of 8 through 11 players and kind of where that's going to come from. It's kind of a 2-part question. One, what did you think of them getting up into the early part of the second round in the draft to do what they did? And 2, are either of Moore or Minot candidates already to be kind of in that, not first off the bench, but, rotation players this year?
As for Moore and Minot, I do think so. I think Minot is a little more intriguing at this point, just in terms of the upside of his game and the things that he's able to do, especially rebounding.
Why not Minot?
Why not Minot? I think we'll see where he's at. I believe he's on the summer league roster. I haven't really taken a close look at the summer league
they both are. Yeah.
So I'm sure there'll be plenty of clips for the fan base and yourself to salivate over coming out of Vegas in a few weeks. So I would probably say he's the one on that radar to get those minutes. As for trading up in the draft, makes a lot of sense for where they're at right now, and at the cost of 2 future second rounders, one of which you acquired in a trade for D'Angelo Russell. It makes sense just to get as many young guys in the pipeline, in that developmental pipeline, as you can right now, and take as many swings at young players on cheap deals who could become significant contributors in 2 years, 3 years, however long it takes. Because you are going to be up against these cap ramifications coming down the road. So you're going to need to fill out the roster with young, cost-controlled talent. And so getting 2 guys this year instead of 1, I feel like is a significant thing for them, and made a lot of sense for where they're at just in terms of roster construction. Not only now, because they have the ability to not draft people who don't need to contribute right away, and down the line because they do have these looming financial questions coming up.
Minot and Moore are on that summer league roster, by the way, as are Leonard Miller, and Jalen Clark is too, although I imagine he won't be playing, but he's officially on the roster as well. That's announced a few days ago. So yeah, we'll see more from those guys. It's interesting. It feels a little bit like the Denver roster construction right now, with a lot of the high price stars, and then a lot of the kind of needing to build out the bottom with those kind of lower cost contracts. But hey, you know what? Denver just won a championship. Tim Connolly built a lot of that team, so there's something to be said from that. I think what they need to find out either right now or within the next 12 months is whether this group of high price stars is the one that is the one that can get them further than just the first round.
Yes, and it'll be a tumultuous year, I'm sure.
Yes, it always is. It always is.
Whether it's even when they're winning.
Yeah,
I feel like there's always going to be stuff that happens. It's the NBA. It's the NBA. It's reality show sports.
Yes.
So there's always going to be stuff happening.
Well, we'll check back in again soon. Maybe once there's something that happens in free agency here in the next week or two. Chris Hine, until then, appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Mike.
Always enjoy talking to Chris, and postscript to our conversation. This time of year, we are always at the whims of the NBA news cycle, so I had to trim just a tiny bit when we were talking about upcoming free agency because the Wolves had made some moves already. Like I said at the jump, they declined. They declined to keep Taurean Prince, who was pretty good for them last year, but maybe is kind of more of a 8th, 9th guy. Same with Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who they brought over in a trade towards the end of that last year, that D'Angelo Russell trade that also brought Mike Conley Jr., declined his qualifying offer, declined to make him a qualifying offer. But sounds like those two sides could still get together on a long-term deal, or at least a multi-year deal. Interesting. Bobby Marks, who was a guest of mine a few weeks ago, did a rundown of projected salaries of all of the NBA free agents. He's got Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Taurean Prince kind of in that rotation player, $4 to $6 million a year category. Interesting. Jalen Noel's kind of in that category too. So we'll see what ends up happening with Nickeil Alexander-Walker. I imagine the Wolves want to keep at least one of those guys, and maybe Nickeil Alexander-Walker is that guy. But we'll find out more free agency starting today. Kind of that exclusive negotiation window. And we'll hear some of these official signings within a week or so. Let's finish with the cooler. The Lynx, like I said at the jump, won again 99-97 over Seattle. Nafisa Collier, another big game, 31 points, including the winning basket with 1.1 seconds left. Like I said, the Lynx, that was in overtime, by the way. The Lynx, 6-9 now, not a great record. But still making progress after that terrible start. And like I said, they would be in the playoffs if they started today. So, just interesting to watch them kind of progress this year, see where this arc takes them. I still think that they are going to want to have one of those top picks next year, make sure they're not missing out on all of that talent coming up, because those difference makers are what take you from, the 7th or 8th seed to top 3, and they've done that before in their history. They know the impact of the lottery. They know what Maya Moore did for this franchise, 12 years ago. So I'll be curious to see how the rest of this season plays out, but they are definitely playing better basketball and some exciting basketball right now, including Collier hitting that fadeaway jumper 1.1 seconds left to beat Seattle on Thursday. That'll do it for me today. Hope you enjoyed all of this week's shows. If you haven't listened to them all, go back and give that a listen. Royce was great as usual on Monday. AJ Przynski, fantastic on Wednesday's show. Sarah McClellan, didn't mean to skip over her, but that was Tuesday, and that was a lot of draft previews, so not all of that is relevant right now. And Thursday, Start Tribune publisher Steve Grove joined me on that show. That was a lot of fun to talk to him, some really good conversations about sports and the future of the Star Tribune and Minnesota. So go back and catch up on those shows if you haven't already. I'm Michael Rand. Have a great weekend. Back at it again on Monday.